Before we read the gospel for today, I want you to each take a few moments and think about the most egregious or embarrassing behavior you've ever witnessed in public. Maybe not something you did, hopefully, but something you saw someone do that you just thought, oh, dear God. Do y'all have something in mind? Okay, anyone willing to share with the crowd? Yeah.
It's embarrassing, but also infuriating. When I was living in Korea, I witnessed a man hitting his wife out the street, and I went and used what Korean I had to stop him.
Yeah,
So it was a little bit of a scary situation.
Yeah.
But I was embarrassed for him because it was ridiculous.
That is ridiculous. So you witnessed a man beating his wife in public. Yeah. Anybody else? Yeah, Candace.
At the doctor's office, and someone was waiting in line, and they were upset that they were waiting, and so they told the receptionist they were going to call ICE on her.
Did you all hear that? She was at a doctor's office waiting in line, and someone was upset that it was taking too long, and so they told the receptionist that they were going to call ICE on her. Yeah. Anybody else? There are these moments that we see where we have, or I at least experience them, where I'm like, oh, this is so embarrassing for you and for humanity. Why? I think that is what Jesus is warning us against in today's lesson, which comes from Luke chapter 14, verses 1 and then 7 through 14, which I will read you now. At that time, Herod the ruler heard reports about Jesus, and he said to his servants, nope, I'm in Matthew. I was like, that's not, just kidding. That's not the text. Let's go to the right book. Luke chapter 14. Okay. On one occasion, when Jesus was going to the house of a leader of the Pharisees to eat a meal on the Sabbath, they were watching him closely. When he noticed how the guests chose the places of honor, he told them a parable. When you are invited by someone to a wedding banquet, do not sit down at the place of honor, in case someone more distinguished than you has been invited by your host. And the host who invited both of you may come to you and say, give this person your place. And then in disgrace, you would start to take the lowest place. But when you are invited, go and sit down at the lowest place, so that when your host comes up, he may say to you, friend, move up higher. Then you will be honored in the presence of all who sit at the table with you. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. He also said to the one who had invited him, when you give a luncheon or a dinner, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or rich neighbors, in case they may invite you in return, and you would be repaid. Instead, when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind, and you will be blessed, because they cannot repay you, for you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. This is the word of the Lord. The first part of this parable seems to be warning against something I hope we would all know. If you're invited to a wedding and there are no name tags at the seats, don't go sit at the head table just because you think you're besties with the bride. You're probably not. And even if you are, it's better for her to come and bring you to the head table than for her to have to ask you to move. The second part of this parable is reminding us that we should not throw lavish wedding parties or any parties so that we'll get invited to the next one. If we are keeping score about who invited us or who we should invite, we might have missed the point. This week, I spent a lot of time in a hospital. In a couple of hospitals, actually. But on Tuesday morning, I found myself at St. Mary's ER. It was overrun with patients because of the shooting a few days before at Bass. They weren't taking any ambulances to Bass, so everything was at St. Mary's. And I had about 8 hours to sit in the St. Mary's ER and listen and observe the behavior of the humans around me. Luckily, I was with a lovely couple, Roz and Sluggo, who did not embarrass me at all. But as we sat in the room, next door at one point, I could hear a man named Leonard had been brought in. To protect his privacy, we'll call him Earl. Earl was brought in, and Earl was very demanding. Earl was yelling. Earl was convinced Earl was dying. About 20 minutes into his stay there, he said, "I've been here for hours." Earl had not been there for hours. Earl was not dying. Earl, while old, was not the oldest or the sickest patient at St. Mary's that hour. A little while later, I got up to get some ice and I walked by Earl's room. And I heard him sort of complaining that they had Negro people working now at the hospital. It was a word I'm not sure I'd ever heard anyone in real life say. And I thought to myself, wow, Earl, that's the doctor who you're asking to save your life. It was one of those moments where I was just so shocked and horrified by the way that humans act when they think they're the center of the universe. Not only did he believe he should get service fastest, but he seemed to reduce the person who was there to save his life simply to an organ, the color of his skin. There are these moments in life where we are invited to be polite, where we probably should be polite. And sometimes we do things or we see things that make us cringe and wonder, what are you thinking? That was my moment listening to Earl and thinking about today's text. A lot of times I think we think that Jesus gives us important life lessons about how to glorify God, how to worship with each other, how to care for the poor and the sick, and that is all important. But it's also just about how to be humble and respectful and to understand that we are not always the center of the universe or the center of the St. Mary's ER. Sometimes we have to wait in line. And sometimes it's better to be polite and kind and wait our turn than to push ourselves to the front and act like we're the most important and then have to be told by triage, no, actually, you're not the most important. God cares just as much about the poor beggar, the woman on the sidewalk, the people who are from a different country or speak a different language or look differently than we do, as he does the upper middle class white woman with good health insurance. We are all equal in God's eyes. I think it would be fun to read through the Bible and see if we could glean some etiquette lessons from Jesus. Don't assume you're the most important person when you walk in a room. You will be embarrassed when you find out you aren't. I was once on a ski trip with a mixed group of people. Some of those people were from the kind of core group of friends that I often hung out with when I was in grad school, and some were sort of friends of friends that had been invited. While we were hanging out in a lodge, a discussion about something inane having to do with financial markets came up. One of the people who was there who does not have any real degrees in financial markets started discussing their very clear, certain opinion about it. I watched this for a little bit and laughed because the three other people who were there had PhDs in financial engineering from Princeton University. It's better to not assume you're the smartest person in the room and then be told, wow, you know a lot about that, than to act like you know more than you do and be reminded that you don't. Right? Life is full of these lessons. But Jesus invites us day after day to remember that we are all created with a purpose and an equality in his eyes. Whether we're the most important guest at the banquet or the least important guest at the banquet, we are all most important in God's eyes. So our etiquette lesson for this week is to remember that we are important to God, but we are not the center of the universe. We should throw dinners, but not just so that we'll be invited to another. We should throw them so that we can share God's love with all of the other children that are important to God. And we should be careful about putting ourselves too high on a pedestal, lest we be removed in an awkward moment. Amen.